A faint scratching broke the silence as a starving German shepherd puppy clawed at his boot in the middle of a frozen storm. The man had grown used to loneliness, but nothing could prepare him for what the trembling creature was trying to show him. Moments later, buried beneath the snow, two white wolf pups lay barely alive, guarded by something that refused to let them die. And in that moment, a man who had stopped believing was about to be led back to something far greater. Before we begin, please support us by subscribing to the channel, and don't forget to leave a comment about this story. Snow fell without sound, swallowing the mountains whole and leaving the world suspended in white silence. Ryan Carter stood on the porch of his isolated cabin, shoulders squared out of habit, more than purpose. At 35, he still carried the unmistakable build of a former United States Navy SEALs operator. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a powerful chest and the kind of controlled posture that suggested danger, even in stillness. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, a faint layer of stubble shadowing a sharp, disciplined jaw. But his eyes, once alert, once alive, now held something quieter. Not peace, just distance. The kind that comes when a man has seen too much, survived too long, and found nothing waiting for him afterward. Life on the mountain had become his way of fading, without disappearing. He fixed broken fences for people who didn't ask questions, hauled wood, kept to himself. Nights were the worst. Not because of fear, but because of the silence. It didn't threaten him. It echoed him. That night, the storm came down harder than usual. Wind clawed through the pine trees, rattling the windows like fingers demanding entry. Ryan had just secured the door when he heard it, a faint uneven scratching at the wood behind him. Not loud, not urgent, just persistent. He turned slowly. The sound came again. Ryan opened the door. A small shape stood in the storm, a German shepherd puppy, no more than a few months old. Its black and tan coat was soaked through, clumped with ice, ribs faintly visible beneath the thin frame. One ear struggled to stand, while the other folded slightly, giving it an unfinished look. But its eyes, amber, sharp, impossibly steady, did not belong to something weak. The puppy stepped forward. It didn't bark. It didn't whine. It reached him and lightly scratched at his pant leg. Then it turned and walked into the storm. Ryan didn't move at first. He had seen animals beg. He had seen fear. This was neither. There was intent in that movement. Purpose. The kind he recognized from another life. The kind that didn't ask for help unless there was no other choice. The puppy stopped a few feet away, glanced back. Waited. Ryan exhaled once, slow and controlled, the way he used to before stepping into something uncertain. Then he grabbed his flashlight, pulled on his coat, and followed. The snow came down thick, erasing the world step by step. The puppy moved ahead with surprising precision, weaving through trees, pausing just long enough to make sure Ryan was still there. It didn't rush. It led. Ryan noticed things without trying, how the puppy avoided deeper drifts, how it angled its body against the wind, how it chose paths that were almost invisible unless you knew how to read them. This wasn't luck. This was survival. After several minutes that felt longer than they should have, the puppy stopped near a fallen tree half buried in snow. It began pawing at the ground, letting out a low, strained sound, not quite a whine, not quite a growl. Ryan dropped to one knee and started digging. Snow gave way to branches. Branches gave way to a hollow. And inside, two small bodies, white. So white they almost disappeared against the snow. Two wolf pups. Their fur was pale as frost, their tiny forms trembling violently, breaths shallow and uneven. Their eyes barely open, their bodies too weak to even curl properly. They looked less like animals, and more like something the winter had almost claimed. Ryan froze. Behind him, The storm howled. Beside him, the puppy moved. It slipped into the hollow without hesitation, pressing its small body against the two pups, curling around them with instinctive precision. It nudged one gently with its nose, then the other, adjusting itself to cover as much of them as it could, not guarding, not attacking, protecting. Ryan watched in silence, something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. A starving domestic puppy, keeping two wild wolf pups alive. There was no training for this, no protocol, no explanation that made sense. He removed his outer coat, wrapping all three small bodies together, lifting them carefully into his arms. The puppy didn't resist. It only pressed closer to the two wolves, as if making sure they stayed within reach. The walk back felt different, not because the storm had eased, it hadn't, but because for the first time in a long while, Ryan wasn't walking alone. Inside the cabin, he set them down near the fire, working quickly but gently. Towels, warm water, careful hands that remembered how to save lives, even if they had forgotten why. The puppy stayed close, always close. Ryan reached toward its neck, clearing away frozen fur. And then he saw it. A torn piece of rope, embedded against its skin, stained dark with dried blood. Not an accident. Not the storm. Something else. Ryan's expression changed. Subtle, but real. Outside, the wind roared louder, pressing against the cabin walls. Inside, three small lives clung to warmth. And Ryan Carter, who had spent years walking away from everything, realized this was the first time something had come looking for him. Morning came slowly, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise over a place that had forgotten warmth. Pale light filtered through frost-covered windows, touching the cabin in quiet strokes of gray and gold. Inside, the fire had burned low, but not out, and in that fragile pocket of heat, life still held on. Ryan Carter had not slept. He sat beside the hearth, one arm resting loosely over his knee, watching the three small bodies he had carried out of the storm. Up close, the reality of them settled in more heavily than it had in the dark. The German Shepherd puppy lay closest to the fire, its thin frame curled protectively, though its breathing remained shallow and uneven. Now that the ice had melted from its fur, its condition was clearer. Too thin, too worn for something so young. Its coat, black along the back and warm brown along the legs and face, should have been full and glossy. Instead, it lay dull and patchy, the skin beneath faintly visible in places. Around its neck, the torn rope mark stood out, raw, irritated, the fur rubbed away. The two wolf pups lay pressed against its side, small bodies barely rising with each breath. Their white fur was finer, softer, not yet grown into the dense coat they would need to survive. One stirred weakly, letting out a faint, broken sound. The other remained still, too still. Ryan moved without thinking. His hands, steady, precise, the same hands that had once stabilized bleeding soldiers under fire, now worked with quiet urgency. He reached for the supplies he had gathered before dawn: warm water, a clean cloth, a makeshift feeding tube fashioned from what little he had. He knelt beside them. "Stay with me," he murmured, though he wasn't sure who he was speaking to. The puppy's eyes opened. Not fully, just enough. Amber, focused, watching him. Ryan paused for half a second, then continued. He fed the weaker wolf pup first, guiding a few drops of diluted milk into its mouth. It barely responded at first. Then, slowly, instinct took over. A faint swallow, then another. The second pup followed, slightly stronger, though still fragile. Throughout it all, the puppy did not move away. It shifted only enough to keep contact with both of them, adjusting its body so the smaller one remained tucked closer to the heat. Ryan noticed that, not consciously at first, but the pattern was there. Intentional. When he finished, he leaned back slightly, studying the scene with the same quiet analysis that had once kept him alive. This wasn't random behavior. The puppy wasn't just staying close, it was positioning itself, regulating warmth, responding to weakness. It had been doing this before he found them. How long? Ryan muttered under his breath. Days. Weeks. The answer unsettled him. He reached out again, this time more gently, brushing his fingers along the puppy's neck. The animal stiffened for a moment, not in fear, but in readiness. Then slowly, it relaxed. Trust, not given freely, but given anyway. Ryan exhaled, a long, controlled breath. He hadn't felt that in a while, that quiet shift in the air when something chose not to run from him. By mid-morning, the storm had eased enough for him to make the drive into town. The road was barely visible beneath layers of snow, but Ryan navigated it with practiced calm. He carried the weakest wolf pup wrapped in a blanket inside his jacket, the puppy and the second pup secured in a crate beside him. The veterinary clinic sat at the edge of town, a modest wooden building with a faded sign that read, Creekside Veterinary. Inside, warmth greeted him first, followed by the steady scent of antiseptic and hay. Dr. Evelyn Hart looked up from her desk as the door opened. She was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with ash-blonde hair pulled into a low, practical bun. Her face was composed, almost stern at first glance, but her eyes, sharp gray, observant, softened just slightly when she recognized Ryan. There was something about her posture that spoke of discipline, but not the military kind. Hers came from years of choosing logic over emotion, of making decisions that others would hesitate to make. Ryan, she said, setting her pen down, you don't usually come in unless something's wrong. He didn't answer right away. He simply stepped forward and opened his coat. Evelyn froze. For a brief moment, her professional composure slipped. Then it returned. What exactly am I looking at? She asked, moving closer. Ryan set the animals down carefully. A reason, he said quietly. I think. Evelyn crouched beside them, her movements efficient but careful. She examined the wolf pups first, her fingers light but precise, checking breathing, reflexes, body temperature. Her expression grew more serious with each passing second. They're wolves, she said. Very young, maybe 5, 6 weeks. She paused, then glanced at the puppy. And this one. This isn't normal. Ryan gave a faint, humorless huff. Nothing about this is normal. Evelyn shifted her attention to the German Shepherd puppy. She lifted its chin slightly, examining the rope wound. Restrained, she said. Not recently, but not long ago either. It broke free, or was forced free. The puppy held her gaze, unblinking. Evelyn's brow tightened. Then she did something unexpected. She sat back on her heels, silent. For a long moment, she didn't touch them again. Instead, she watched. The puppy moved first, inching closer to the smaller wolf pup, pressing against it, adjusting its position with a gentle nudge. The movement was subtle, almost instinctive, but it was deliberate. Evelyn exhaled slowly. That shouldn't be happening, she said. Ryan didn't look away. But it is. She nodded once, as if confirming something to herself. Yes, she said quietly. It is. Her tone had changed. Not softer, but deeper, less clinical, more aware. She stood, crossing her arms as she looked at Ryan. You realize what this means, don't you? She asked. Ryan met her gaze. Tell me. Evelyn hesitated for the first time. Then she said, If anyone else sees this, those wolf pups will be taken. Immediately. That's the law. Ryan's jaw tightened slightly. And the dog? She looked at the puppy again. Evaluated. Possibly removed, too. Silence filled the room. Not tense, but heavy. Ryan glanced down at the 3 small lives that had somehow found their way into his. For the first time in years, the question forming in his mind wasn't about survival. It was about choice, and choices had consequences. Evelyn stepped closer again, her voice lower now. "There might be a way," she said. Ryan looked up. A narrow one. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows just enough to remind them that winter wasn't finished yet. Inside, something else had just begun. The snow softened, but the cold did not leave. It simply learned to wait beneath the surface. Ryan Carter stood outside his cabin at first light, watching his breath fade into the pale air. The storm had passed, but its silence lingered, thick, watchful, like something unfinished. Behind him, inside the cabin, 3 lives moved in fragile rhythm, bound by something no rulebook had prepared him for. The German Shepherd puppy, still unnamed, was the first to emerge from the doorway. Its gait had steadied over the past days, though its body remained lean, every line of muscle visible beneath its young frame. The wound around its neck had begun to close, but the mark remained, a thin, angry ring beneath thickening fur. Its ears were stronger now, both beginning to stand, giving it a sharper, more alert silhouette. But it was the eyes that held Ryan's attention. Amber, unwavering, always scanning, always aware. Not like a pet, like something that had already learned what it meant to survive alone. It paused beside him, then looked back. Ryan followed its gaze. 2 white shapes tumbled awkwardly out of the cabin door. Frost and Luna. They were larger now, not by much, but enough to see the shift. Their legs were steadier, their movements less desperate. Frost, the slightly larger of the 2, carried himself with a quiet boldness, stepping forward first, testing the snow with uncertain but determined steps. Luna followed more cautiously, her movements softer, her pale blue eyes constantly flicking between Ryan and the puppy, as if measuring safety in both directions. They stayed close. Not to Ryan, to the puppy. Ryan watched them for a long moment, arms folded loosely, his posture relaxed, but his mind working. He had seen units form under pressure before, bonds built in chaos, but this wasn't strategy. It wasn't training. It was something older, something instinctive, and somehow chosen. "Doesn't make sense," he muttered. Behind him, boots crunched against snow. Dr. Evelyn Hart approached, her long dark coat pulled tight around her slender frame, her ash-blonde hair still tied neatly despite the wind. She moved with quiet efficiency, but there was a new hesitation in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there during their first meeting. Curiosity had taken root. "Biology doesn't always ask for permission," she said calmly, stepping beside him. Ryan didn't look at her. "You find a way yet?" Evelyn exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the cold. "I found a possibility," she corrected. "Not a solution." Ryan finally turned. "Explain." She glanced toward the 3 animals, her expression thoughtful, measured. "There's a classification under observational research, rare and rarely approved. It allows for temporary custody of wildlife under controlled conditions, if the situation provides scientific value." Ryan's jaw shifted slightly. "And this qualifies." Evelyn gave a faint, almost reluctant nod. "Interspecies maternal bonding between a domestic canine and wild wolf pups. In extreme environmental stress." She paused. "Yes, it qualifies." Ryan looked back at the puppy. It had positioned itself between Frost and Luna again, not blocking them, just present, a quiet center. "And the risk?" he asked. Evelyn's voice hardened slightly. "If we do this wrong, they take the wolves, immediately. No discussion." Ryan didn't respond, because he understood. This wasn't a fight he could win with force. It had to be done, carefully. Over the next several days, the cabin changed. Not visibly at first, but in purpose. Ryan built a small enclosure outside, not to contain, but to guide. A space where Frost and Luna could explore safely, smell the air, test their instincts without losing contact with what had kept them alive. He documented everything, as Evelyn instructed, feeding patterns, reactions to sound, behavioral shifts. He hadn't written this much in years. At first, the words came stiff, mechanical. Then something shifted. He began to notice details. The way Frost reacted first to unfamiliar scents, alert, forward, cautious but curious. The way Luna stayed back half a step, observing longer, choosing her moments. The way the puppy adjusted itself between them, never forcing, never pulling, only aligning. It didn't teach them. It steadied them. Evelyn visited often, sometimes staying hours longer than necessary. She observed, recorded, but also, though she would never admit it, she watched with something closer to wonder than analysis. One afternoon, she stood near the enclosure while the 3 animals moved through fresh snow. "They're not imprinting the way I expected," she said quietly. Ryan leaned against the wooden post. "Meaning?" "They're not becoming dependent on the dog," she replied. "They're becoming confident through it." Ryan gave a small nod. "Yeah." Evelyn looked at him then, studying him with the same careful attention she gave the animals. "You are too," she said. Ryan didn't answer, because she wasn't wrong. Something inside him, something that had stayed buried beneath routine and silence, was shifting. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough that mornings felt different. Enough that the cabin no longer felt like a place to wait out time, but a place where something was happening. Then came the night, everything sharpened. The puppy froze first, its head lifted slightly, ears forward, body still. Frost followed a second later, his posture lowering instinctively. Luna pressed closer to the puppy, her body tense. Ryan noticed immediately. He stepped outside. The air had changed. Not colder, just wrong. He scanned the perimeter slowly, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. Then he saw it. Tracks. Not animal. Human. Fresh. Too close to the cabin. Ryan crouched, examining them with quiet precision. The stride was deliberate. Not someone lost. Not a passerby. Someone watching. Behind him, the puppy moved silently to his side. No sound. No hesitation. Ryan reached down, his hand brushing briefly against its back, not as reassurance, as acknowledgement. "We're not alone," he murmured. The wind shifted, carrying a faint metallic scent. Ryan's eyes narrowed. He stood slowly. Somewhere beyond the tree line, unseen but present, something, or someone, had found them. And for the first time since the storm, Ryan felt it again. Not the cold, not the silence, but the beginning of something that would not stay quiet for long. Spring arrived quietly, not as a sudden change, but as a slow surrender of winter's grip. Snow no longer fell in heavy silence. Instead, it softened, thinned, retreated into shaded corners beneath the trees. Patches of dark earth began to show through, and the air, though still cold, carried something new beneath it. Movement. Life. A promise that didn't ask permission. Ryan Carter stood at the edge of the forest boundary, his boots sinking slightly into the damp, thawing ground. He had not shaved in days, the faint stubble along his sharp jaw giving him a more weathered look than before, but his posture remained the same, steady, grounded, as if the earth itself recognized him now. His eyes, once distant, now followed something with quiet attention. Ahead of him, 3 figures moved across the thinning snow. Ghost ran first. No longer the fragile, trembling puppy from the storm, the German shepherd had grown into his frame, lean but strong, muscles defined beneath a now healthy black and tan coat. His ears stood tall and alert, his amber eyes sharp but calm. There was discipline in the way he moved, but not the kind taught by commands. It was earned, lived, and there was something else, too, something almost gentle in the way he glanced back, always checking, always aware of who followed. Frost followed just behind, larger now, his white coat thick and radiant under the pale sun. His movements were confident, measured, every step deliberate. There was a natural authority in him, an emerging strength that didn't need to be proven. Luna ran beside him, lighter, quieter, her pale blue eyes still carrying that careful watchfulness. Where Frost tested boundaries, Luna understood them. Where he pushed forward, she balanced. They no longer moved like something that needed saving. They moved like something that belonged. Ryan exhaled slowly, his breath no longer visible in the warming air. "They're ready," came a voice behind him. Dr. Evelyn Hart approached, her boots leaving faint prints in the soft ground. Today, she looked different, not in appearance, but in presence. Her posture was less rigid, her expression less guarded. The ash-blonde hair remained tied back, but a few loose strands framed her face now, softened by the gentler light of the season. She carried a folder under one arm, but she wasn't looking at it. She was watching them. They passed every behavioral marker, she continued quietly. Hunting instinct, spatial awareness, avoidance response. They're not dependent anymore. Ryan nodded once. He had known, not from the reports, from the distance. They didn't sleep pressed against Ghost every night anymore. They explored farther, stayed gone longer, returned, but not because they had to, because they chose to. And now, they wouldn't. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice lowering. "We begin the soft release today." The words landed with a weight that surprised Ryan, not because he didn't expect them, but because expectation didn't make it easier. A short distance away, a marked boundary line had been set, subtle, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Beyond it stretched protected forest land, untouched, vast, unforgiving in the way only true wilderness could be. Home. Ghost slowed as he approached the line. Frost stopped first, nose lifting slightly as he caught scents carried from deeper within the forest. Luna paused beside him, her body still but alert, absorbing everything. Ryan remained where he was. He did not call them. He would not. Ghost stepped forward once more, closing the distance between them. He lowered his head slightly, touching Frost first, nose to nose. A brief contact. Nothing dramatic. No hesitation. Then Luna. She leaned into him for a fraction longer. Then Ghost stepped back. Just one step. It was enough. Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. Not sharp, not painful. Just full. Frost turned, without looking back. His body shifted forward, instincts aligning with something ancient and undeniable. Luna followed, though she hesitated once, just once, her gaze flicking briefly toward Ryan and Ghost. Not asking, not pleading, remembering. Then she turned as well, and together they crossed the line. The forest received them without ceremony. No sound, no signal, just the quiet acceptance of something returning to where it had always belonged. Ryan did not move. Beside him, Evelyn remained still. Ghost stood slightly ahead, his body relaxed, ears forward, watching. Waiting, but not expecting. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time didn't hold shape in moments like that. Ryan finally exhaled, long and slow, his shoulders lowering just slightly, as if something he had been carrying without knowing had finally been set down. "They'll survive," Evelyn said softly. Ryan nodded. "Yeah," he replied. "They will." Ghost turned then, walking back toward Ryan without hesitation. No lingering glance, no searching, just certainty. Ryan crouched slightly as the dog approached, his hand resting briefly against Ghost's neck. Not holding. Just there. "Good job," he murmured. Ghost leaned into the touch for a second, then stepped back. Behind them, the forest remained still. But something had changed. Not out there. Here. Ryan stood, looking once more at the line where snow met soil, where past met something new. He had spent years believing that holding on was the only way not to lose everything. But this was different. This was choosing to let go, and realizing that it didn't leave you empty. It left you whole. The wind moved gently through the trees, no longer a force to fight, but something that carried sound, scent, life. Ryan turned away from the forest, not because it no longer mattered, but because he understood now. Some things were never meant to stay, only to pass through and change you. Spring did not erase the cold. It simply taught the earth how to breathe again. The cabin stood where it always had, perched quietly at the edge of the mountain. But something about it had changed, not in structure, not in shape, but in presence. The silence inside was no longer empty. It held memory now. It held echoes, not of loss, but of something that had passed through and left meaning behind. Ryan Carter sat on the wooden steps just outside the door, elbows resting loosely on his knees, his posture relaxed in a way it had not been months ago. His dark hair had grown slightly longer, no longer trimmed with military precision, and the faint stubble along his jaw gave him a softened edge. But it was his eyes that had changed the most. They no longer searched for threats or exits. They stayed. They noticed. They allowed. Beside him, Ghost lay stretched out in the sunlight. He had grown into a powerful, balanced animal, his black and tan coat now thick and clean, muscles defined beneath it, ears sharp and upright. But his strength was quiet. He did not move unless needed. His amber eyes remained watchful, but not restless. There was patience in him now, a grounded stillness, as if he too had found a place where he no longer needed to run. Ryan reached down absent-mindedly, his hand brushing along Ghost's neck, fingers grazing the faint scar where the rope had once been. The fur had grown back, but not entirely. A thin line remained, a quiet reminder of something endured and survived. "You did good," Ryan murmured, not expecting a response. Ghost's tail shifted once against the wood. The days had settled into something steady. Ryan no longer moved through them just to pass time. He built, repaired, expanded. What had once been a storage shed near the cabin now stood as something else entirely. A small structured space reinforced against the cold, lined with bedding, basic medical supplies, and simple enclosures. Not cages, temporary refuge. Dr. Evelyn Hart stood inside that space now, reviewing notes clipped neatly onto a wooden board. She had become a more frequent presence, though she never imposed. Today she wore a thick wool coat, her ash-blonde hair pulled into a looser knot than before, a few strands falling freely along her temples. Her face, once defined by sharp focus and restraint, carried something softer now, not less intelligent, just less guarded. "You're documenting more than required," she said without looking up. Ryan leaned against the doorway. "Old habit." Evelyn glanced at him briefly. "No," she said. "Not that kind." Ryan didn't argue, because she was right. He wasn't documenting to prove anything anymore. He was remembering. Outside, the wind carried a different sound than it had in winter. Not a howl, a movement, leaves shifting, water running somewhere beneath melting ice, life returning in quiet ways. Evelyn stepped out beside him, following his gaze toward the tree line. "They've been sighted," she said. Ryan's eyes didn't shift immediately. "Where?" "North Ridge, near the protected boundary." Ryan nodded slowly. "They're staying clear of people," Evelyn added. "That's good." He let out a breath. "Yeah." There was no urgency in him now, no need to chase confirmation. He understood something that hadn't made sense before. Some connections didn't require presence, only knowing. Days passed, then weeks. The snow retreated further, revealing patches of green that pushed stubbornly through the thawing ground. Ryan worked longer hours now, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Word had spread quietly through the nearby town. Injured animals began arriving. A deer with a broken leg, a fox caught in old wire, a hawk unable to fly. Ryan didn't turn any of them away. He didn't ask for recognition. He simply made space. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the tall pines, a young volunteer arrived for the first time. Her name was Lila Monroe, a woman in her late 20s with a slight frame and sun-warmed skin, her brown hair tied loosely at the back of her neck. There was a gentleness to her movements, but also a quiet resilience, the kind that comes from learning to stand alone before choosing to stand beside others. She spoke softly, but her eyes paid attention to everything. "I heard you might need help," she said. Ryan studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Everyone needs help," he replied. Ghost approached her cautiously, circling once before stopping at her side. He didn't bark, didn't retreat. He observed, then accepted. Lila smiled faintly, lowering her hand without forcing contact. "Hi," she whispered. Ghost remained still, then gently leaned forward. Ryan noticed that too. He always noticed. That evening, after the work was done, Ryan walked the outer boundary alone, Ghost at his side. The air was cooler again, though not harsh. The sky stretched wide above them, streaked with fading light. He stopped near the same line where everything had changed, where two white shapes had once stepped into the unknown. Ryan crouched slightly, his gaze scanning the ground out of habit more than expectation. Then he saw it. Tracks, fresh. Not many, but enough. Larger now, stronger. Ghost stepped forward, nose lowering briefly to the ground before lifting again, his body still. No tension, no alarm, just recognition. Ryan followed the direction of the tracks, his eyes narrowing slightly as he traced them into the edge of the trees. And then, movement. Not close, not approaching, but there. Two figures stood between the trees, partially hidden by shadow and distance. White, familiar. Frost stood taller now, his body fully grown, his presence undeniable even at a distance. Luna stood beside him, her form just as strong. But there was something else now, a subtle fullness in her frame, a shift that Ryan recognized without needing to be told. Life. Continuing. Luna's head turned slightly, her pale eyes catching the last light as they aligned, for a brief moment, with Ryan's. No sound passed between them, no step forward, no step back. Just a stillness that held everything that needed to be said. Then, slowly, they turned, and disappeared into the forest once more. Ryan remained where he was, the weight in his chest not heavy, but steady. Ghost sat beside him, quiet as always. Neither moved for a long time, because they didn't need to. Some endings were not meant to close. They were meant to continue. Somewhere you didn't have to follow. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive as thunder from the sky. They come quietly, like a small trembling life knocking at your door when you've already given up on feeling anything at all. Maybe God doesn't always change our path. Sometimes, He sends something to walk beside us until we remember who we are. In our daily lives, we often overlook the smallest moments, the chance to care, to pause, to love without reason. But those moments, they might be the very ones meant to save us. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that love still exists. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and may God bless you and your loved ones with warmth, protection, and unexpected miracles.